We want to start off with a reminder that we are not doctors. Before you make any changes or try something new, always consult with your doctor and medical team first. Chronic illness can vary from patient to patient, so it's always best to consult with your own doctor for what is best for you.
Hello, welcome to IBD Determined. I'm your host, Mason Harvey, and I have Crohn's disease.
And I'm your host, Michelle Harvey. I'm Mason's mom, and I speak from the role of a caregiver to somebody with Crohn's disease. Today, we are going to talk about something we've briefly talked about before, which is
Stress.
stress.
The wonderful topic of stress.
I mean, it's the holidays, right? So like
holidays are stressful, right? You gotta buy the presents for the kids, you gotta decorate, you gotta worry about taking it all down after the holidays.
wow, you already sound so grown up.
You gotta plan. You gotta plan for the future.
Yeah.
Stress. Perfect discovery today's topic.
Yes. Stress is a all year long, but I think sometimes like this time of the year, it's a little more
hectic.
a little more hectic for everybody. And there's so we're going to talk about stress with IBD, just cover that real briefly. And then we're going to talk about something more personal today, which is Mason's diagnosis story and how stress is
affected it.
connected to it. Yeah. So we're going to kind of walk through that. We're not going to go through the whole thing.
No, we'd be here for hours.
We'd be
I
here
don't think
way
you want,
too
I
long.
don't think you want a podcast that goes on for hours.
No, but I think a lot of people ask us these questions and they're
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah.
And so we thought maybe you'll want to stick around and hear a story from us about our journey with it. And I'm sure a lot of you listening are going to be able to relate. Maybe not to all of it because he was diagnosed during COVID.
Yeah.
But if any of you guys were being treated or had a diagnosis during COVID, I'm sure some of this is going to make a lot of sense.
It can be relatable.
It will be relatable,
Yeah.
I'm sure. And then just in general, being hospitalized and being diagnosed, I think a lot of you will still be able to relate to that with your own kids or yourselves if you have IBD. And if you don't have any health issues and you're just listening to support somebody or just because you find us interesting,
that could be it.
That would be yeah, that'd be cool. That would be cool too.
Wow.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
But this may also just be interesting to you to hear the story because before Mason got sick, we were just like you then. You know, we didn't have any health issues or concerns. And so it was all very eye-opening. So let's get started before I continue to babble
about the thesis.
I'm going to keep going with the thesis. Mason looks at this. We don't write out a script. We do make a note of the like quotes, or if we're using like today, we are going to be taking information from an article. So Mason is looking at this like an essay because we form our thesis and our three topics.
All that wonderful stuff that I'm sure you don't want to hear about.
Yeah, especially if you're on school break. You're like, let's not say that word right now.
Let's not bring that up.
A really bad word during school break. Thesis.
The cuss word. School.
So, okay. So let's get on topic here. Okay. And I'll let you read this one, Mace. Okay. So this is from Penn Medicine.
Okay, here we go. I'm gonna read something. The researchers also found that when exposed to chronic stress, the neurons in the ENS and GI tract stop functioning as they normally do, which can lead to impaired bowel movements and exacerbated IBD symptoms.
So what that kind of means to me is that this is going to be a reaction by anybody to stress. And I'm sure some of you listening can relate to this even if you don't have IBD. So having IBD, though, is going to exacerbate it. It's going to make it worse. So the main thing we wanted to say here is that stress doesn't cause Crohn's.
No, it won't cause it.
You already have Crohn's. That's a totally different topic on that nobody
No
really
one really knows
knows.
what Crohn's is. No one knows how Crohn's is started quite yet. It's
Right.
still being studied.
Right. So this is just us showing you triggers, and stress is one of those. There's many different potential triggers. Today's topic is stress, which is just potentially something that could trigger a flare. So it's not going to cause you to have Crohn's, but it could awaken it or it could cause you to flare if you do have it. That's our understanding, at least. We're
Yeah.
obviously we say this all the time. We're not doctors.
We're not
We're not
doctors.
scientists,
Just
but
that disclaimer,
that's
but
what we've learned along the way.
yeah.
We have a little bit of experience with that. Then in another article from Scientific American, they say that they've traced two detailed molecular pathways from the brain to the gut that produce IBD flares.
That's fun.
Yeah, that's interesting though,
Yeah,
because
it
there's a
is.
direct connection that these scientists have found that produce these flares. So
Good job to them.
yeah, it's really important to connect this because of course we're all going to have stress in life. You
Yeah.
can't avoid it. But then sometimes there are bigger stressful events like
Yeah.
somebody passing away or being diagnosed with a
Being
chronic
diagnosed with
illness.
any disease in general.
Ironically,
Yeah.
the thing that's interesting is I think a lot of people maybe in the past, I don't think so much anymore. I'm not sure. We'll go into this a little bit because there's something that when you were diagnosed that kind of relates back to this. But it doesn't mean that IBD is all in the head. And it just means that it can trigger the release of brain chemicals that cause IBD symptoms. So it's kind of working in tandem.
Yeah.
But sometimes people used to get blamed for their symptoms, like they were causing it because of their stress or their anxiety.
Which
And
isn't possible.
right, it's not you. You're not going to cause the
Did you
disease.
want that? No.
No,
Why would you cause it?
maybe doctors didn't have enough information, I don't know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so it's easy to think because there is a connection here
Mhm.
that it triggers it, but maybe
You
it's
didn't know
easy to
that.
blame it because it can happen
Yeah.
to anybody. Stress can trigger,
Things.
those issues.
Those funny little
I
moments.
guess. Yeah. So this is just interesting to me because, as it says here, it does mean psychotherapy and targeted stress management techniques have been underappreciated, and they do play important roles in preventing and treating flares. So that's interesting. And it specifically, it says, so in response to chronic stress, the brain releases a stress hormone called CRH. CRH causes the pituitary gland to stimulate the adrenal glands on the kidneys. And that releases another class of
Uh,
hormones, which are
A chain reaction.
glucocorticoids. And then they go into two different pathways. So they can affect you in two different ways.
Mhm.
So I'm not going to go into all those details, but I just think it's very interesting and was important to talk about this because there have been studies being done. And I think it really does show that stress does play a role in this. And,
Because it causes a chain reaction of things that aren't fun.
mhm, and, you
A
know,
domino effect.
you have things like school, you
Yeah.
guys have tests, you have homework, you have other stressors for kids. There's adults that have work that, there's all kinds of things that cause stress on us. So it's important for caregivers to recognize that these are real things. And so if your child is stressed out and you are seeing these symptoms, to know that there is a connection. And if you're an adult, like
Yeah.
things are happening there. The other thing is, and we talked about this in our one of our other podcasts, how we talked about how it's like on a cycle and it goes like stress, it causes more stress because then you get stressed because
The
you're
stress makes
flaring
the flare worse,
and
the
then it
flare
makes the flare
worse,
worse
then you
and
get more stress because of that, and
right.
it's the never-ending loop that progressively
So
gets
then
worse.
and this is according to the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation on their website. They also have some information on stress, is that IBD patients have more stress than others,
Then
which makes sense. And that can lead to anxiety or depression and other things. So it's just important to recognize the role that stress plays. And what we're here to talk about today, besides just kind of those little interesting facts we found about stress, is to talk about our story.
yeah, our
And
story, specifically ours. It's
yeah,
different for everyone, but we're talking
yep.
about our story today.
And we're not talking so much as stress for me as a caregiver because that's not going to necessarily affect Mason's flare unless he's concerned because he's worried about me.
Mhm.
But this is more from the standpoint of a patient and what they're going through and kind of looking at it and it's taking a step back because now we talk about, we're like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on
No wonder, yeah, I
Like,
was
no
stressed.
wonder. I remember telling the nurses, like, "This doesn't happen at home.
Yeah,
This is not my son. What is going on?"
it's really weird.
And it was like, he was in the restroom probably every, like, 15 minutes at some points,
It
and
was like the day before, I was fine, and then you go into the hospital, all
yeah.
of a sudden, it's just like a 90-degree angle that starts going right down.
It just drops you, and it just got really bad.
Mhm.
And so
It's
anyways,
stressful.
yeah. And so we'll get into that in a minute, but I want to start with what happened a few months before Mason's diagnosis. So Mason was diagnosed in June of 2020.
2020.
And most of you might remember around March of 2020 is when we all went into lockdown.
Lockdown for COVID.
And that was a very stressful time for
'Cause
everybody.
I've never been through a pandemic before, and it
No.
was really like, "What's going on? What's going on?" Because
Mhm.
people were, because my dad still had to go to Costco, and at the
Yeah,
time, people were dying because they didn't really know how to treat COVID quite yet.
it was
And
scary.
so it was scary because I was like, well, what if he catches COVID? What if he gets really sick? What if bad things
Mhm.
happen to him, you know? And so I was really stressful. And then there were food shortages. And so there,
We had gone to the day they closed the schools
yeah, the
down,
days they closed
when they
the
made the
schools down.
announcement that the schools were closing down, unbeknownst to us, we're like, "Oh, let's run to
Albertsons,
Albertsons. We have to
it'll be
pick up some
fine.
groceries." It wasn't like we needed a bunch of
Mhm,
stuff, and as we were driving there, we heard on the radio the announcement that they were closing the schools,
mhm.
and I'm like, "Oh my
Oh,
gosh, like,
that's not
this
good.
is crazy." Like, okay, so when we got to the store, I noticed the parking lot was full, which never
Like, everyone
happens.
in America was at Albertsons
Yeah.
that day.
All the grocery stores, huh?
Yeah.
And so we were like, "Why is the parking lot so full?" I'm thinking, "This is weird." And then we finally found a space, and when we went to get a cart, there was no
Carts.
carts. And I'm like, "Where's all the carts?" And so we're kinda just standing there, and we go and we kinda look in the store, and it is, like, packed.
Yeah, like New York streets.
Yeah, like downtown, yeah, New
Mhm,
York, like, it was crazy. And so we're kinda looking, and somebody hands us their cart, and we're like, "Thank you." And so we
thank
go
you.
inside, and
Mhm.
then some people were, like, wearing masks. At the time,
We didn't know
we didn't
what that was
have
about.
yeah, at the time, we didn't have our masks yet, and we're just looking at everybody. People were bumping into carts.
Mhm.
The shelves were empty already.
They were, like,
Lines were
almost
so
taking
long.
people were almost taking food from other people, like, they'd go
Mhm.
run up and grab the thing, and before someone else could kinda it was very,
Yeah,
crazy.
you were really, like,
I
freaked
wasn't
out.
having it. It
Yeah.
wasn't fun.
You were pretty freaked out, and so you were 10 at
Mhm.
the time,
Yeah.
and I'm just sure a lot of you are able to relate to this, and you're probably listening, you're like, "Ah, yeah,
Yeah.
that happened to us."
It was
So
very fun.
anyways, that was
Mhm.
that part of it, and then our dog passed away,
Mhm.
and
Right around the beginning of COVID.
yeah, right in March, same
Mhm.
time, and so she passed away, and she was almost 17 years old.
Human years.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was almost 17 years
Yeah.
old, and it was very upsetting for Mason. So we had these really stressful events, and so, there's no
All
proof.
around the same time,
Yeah, I
all
don't
at
know
once.
that it necessarily caused him to flare, but
No.
it makes sense now that these were some hectic, scary times, and that because Mason had Crohn's disease, which we didn't know yet, but
Mhm.
it could make sense why he started flaring.
Flaring.
So those are some stressful events
That
for
led up
us.
to the big flare.
Yeah, that we think
Yeah.
could have
Has a
contributed.
possibility.
Yeah, and it makes sense. It makes sense to me based on everything that we've learned afterwards. We're just gonna walk through the point where we went to the
Yeah.
hospital. And we went straight to the hospital after we were at his pediatrician's office because that's where she sent us. And when we got there, the very first thing that happened was that only one parent was allowed.
And I was like, "What?
Yeah,
What'd you say?
yeah,
What does that mean?"
yeah. And so only one parent.
Was allowed up in a room at once.
Yeah. And so Jason said, "Okay, well, I'll stay here." And so then Mason, you were already upset
Yeah.
because it's like, "Well,
Well,
why
first
can't I
I
have
wanna
my
say something
parents?"
real quick. I was mad because, like, first of all, that doesn't make sense because one person could be in the room at once, which means if
Mhm.
she left the room, then he could come up and stay in the room, So that means they could both be in the room, but not at the same time. So, like, what's the harm in having them in the same room at the same time? Like, why is that bad? If he could come up right after she
Yeah.
leaves, what is the point of only having one parent when they can both be up at different times?
It really didn't make
It
a lot
didn't
of
make any
sense
sense.
at all to me because
And I
I
was like,
kept
"What?"
thinking, "Well, if I'm in there and then I leave and then he gets to go up because we could switch." It wasn't the same parent. It was one parent at a time. And so it's like,
It didn't
"Okay."
make any sense.
So we run down, he would switch with me, I'd run up, and then I'd run, so anyways, it was really
And also for me, I've never really been at a hospital before or hospitalized, so it was all just very confusing.
yeah, it was scary because it was about 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So it's dark in there and it was quiet. That was
It's
the
just
other
very
thing I
quiet, yeah.
remember. It was
It's
very
just eerily
quiet.
quiet.
We were escorted up by a security guard, and when we walked down the hallway, it was really just eerie because it was dark. I guess they had the lights turned down and you
So
could
as
see
people
kids
could
in
see.
their beds. And it was just kind of like, whoa, like it kind of got real,
Mhm.
I think.
It just kinda got, like, pretty like, not scary, but just, like,
Mhm.
eye-opening, I guess.
Yeah. We got to the room and they had to do a COVID test, which Mason decided to hide out in the bathroom.
I mean, that's the natural place to hide when you
He
have Crohn's
didn't
disease,
wanna get
right?
it done. And so eventually we got that done. We had to wait that till he tested negative, and once he tested negative, that was the other weird rule. Then
Mhm.
I could switch and let his dad
Yeah.
come in.
Why
I
is
didn't
it
understand that. I
why
don't know. Maybe one of
me?
you listening understands, but
Yeah, if you work at Brady's, maybe there's a reason you can tell us.
yeah.
So,
I
just an
didn't get it.
idea.
So, he had to have, X-rays,
Mhm.
and he had an IV placed, and then they did, like, the EKG, they put the stuck monitors all over his back, all over his chest, over his stomach, he was covered in these monitors, they put so he had those they hooked those up to him, he was hooked up to the IV machine, and then they also did blood, they did,
Blood work.
yeah, and I don't know if they did it through the IV, but
Yeah.
no matter what, you didn't like it, you were
No,
screaming at
no.
everybody. But they had the, um, monitor
Oh, yeah, on the
on your
finger. There was
finger.
this little thing that goes on your finger, and I wasn't sure it was, like, some little blood prick thing that it was just, like, kinda hidden or something, but it was just this thing that would go on your finger, and it stayed there.
Yeah, I think it monitored your
Or yeah,
oxygen.
oxygen, my bad.
Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
did.
We don't know, we're not doctors.
So they had that, and so everything he's hooked up to these monitors, now their monitors are beeping, and you're watching his heartbeat, and you're watching
Mhm.
and it went from, like, it was just gonna be some simple tests that we thought, and then it just was like, "Oh, no, they wanted to run everything," and I thought, "Well, okay, at least they're being careful,
Yeah,
they're
at least.
really trying to figure out what's going on here." And so they did all that stuff, and he was so stressed.
Mhm.
I think you were so scared.
Yeah, so, I didn't like shots at all. I
Mhm.
hated just a
Yep.
simple shot, and they were giving me these infusions that were basically shots that stayed in your arm, and they could take blood out, they
It's
could
an IV.
yeah, an IV, like, and it was just, like, very scary to
Yeah,
me.
and they put, like, that splint around your arm so you couldn't move
Yeah,
it.
and that so, like, even if I wanted to sleep, I couldn't go like this, I had to keep my arm just, like, straight out.
Yeah, so that was for him, I think that
Mhm.
was really
It
traumatizing. That
was.
was really scary. And so we went from, like, 0 to 100 really fast.
2000.
And so it made sense, why maybe all of a sudden he
The panic
started
just kicked in.
yeah, it started kicking in, and he kept asking if his dad could be up there with us, and, they were like, "Nope, but they can switch, you can see your dad," but he's like, "No, I wanna see them both." And it was very upsetting, it was the first time our whole family had been really apart, and
And
we
there was
just
nothing you could do about it.
no, but then I remember telling me, "Well, it'll just be for tonight,
Yeah, just
we'll
before
get it'll be
tonight.
okay." And that yeah, that
2 months later,
it didn't work
SpongeBob.
that way. I think the other thing that was really stressful while we were in there was we had been told, like, everything on the news was like, to not go to doctor's
Yeah,
offices if you could, to avoid hospitals at all costs, this
because people who had COVID would go to hospitals or
yeah.
doctor offices, and we were in the one place
And
they
then
told
here
us
we are.
not the one place they told you shouldn't go,
Right,
and
was
we're
the
there.
hospital, and here we are, and then we had to wear masks in the
Yeah,
room, and then the nurses were wearing, like, their COVID
the
hazmat
COVID
suits,
yeah,
like
the
we called
hazmat
them.
suits.
They had to suit up, so they come in and they put on a special cover. They
Something
had
straight from a nuclear power plant.
yeah, and they it was
Yeah,
like a
oh, it
like a
was a
v
face mask.
yeah,
Like a mask, but it was plastic, and it was up here, and it just came down over their face.
yeah, they had scrub caps
Yeah,
and, like, you feel like you're in a science like
yeah,
a lab, and that was really intimidating too. So, nothing felt comfortable.
no,
Everything was very anxiety inducing, the whole situation, and so you think about all these things, and nobody really had a way at the time, I think everyone was so scared of COVID, they weren't trying to think about you guys and,
yeah.
like, what these kids were probably going through. Maybe they did think about it, but it didn't seem like that
It wasn't the
to
first
me.
priority.
Yeah, it just didn't seem like that. So the other thing, we had to wait on test results, which was also stressful. That
Stressful.
was the whole time. And then they never would say like, "Oh, you're gonna be going home in 2 days."
Yeah,
Every time you'd ask, remember, they'd be like,
because 'cause I'd be like, "Oh, am I
"Oh."
going home tomorrow?" And they're like, "Oh, I mean, maybe there's a chance, you know." But
Yeah.
I feel like they almost did good not telling you when you're going home, because if they told you, "Oh, in 2 months, you'll be going home," you'd
Yeah.
be like, "What?
And to
What?
be
What?"
fair, they didn't know it would be
Yeah,
2 months,
yeah.
but it would have been nice if we knew like, "Hey, you'll probably be here a couple weeks." And I don't think anybody wanted to even say that
Yeah,
out
because it
loud.
would've even caused more stress.
Yeah.
So if you just go along with the flow, maybe it wouldn't cause as much stress
Yeah.
if
So it's
you
kind
know,
of like
okay.
that uncertainty of
Yeah.
when will
Am I
we
ever
be
gonna go home?
home? Yeah, it
As
started
far
to
as
feel like,
you know?
maybe we'll just move in here.
Yeah.
So it was and it
Get my
was
furniture.
yeah, it was just a very stressful thing not knowing when things might ever get back to normal. And when he was put on gut rest, well, we knew we'd be there because he was fed through a PIC
A
line
PICC
in his
line.
arm with
You couldn't
TPN,
eat for 2 weeks the first time and then 2
2
weeks the
weeks
second
again.
time, so it was 4 weeks.
So we knew we were
Yeah.
in it, like, once that
I was like,
happened, because 'cause they're like,
"That's
"He can't
great."
go home with us," and so it's like, "Okay." So and that was also stressful too,
Mhm.
because all of a sudden you couldn't eat or drink, and you were
Yeah.
really hungry, and you couldn't
And
because they're
yeah,
feeding you through that PIC line.
yeah. Also, the first night I didn't eat anything because it was too late.
Yeah, that was
We got there,
really
they gave me the menu, and they're like, "Oh,
yep.
it's too late.
They're like,
You can't
"Here's
order
the
today.
menu. Oh, but it's
It's
closed."
closed, so maybe in the
I'm like,
morning."
"Did
I'm like,
anybody think to tell us this when we got in here? Because we sat in the room for a few hours." I'm like, "Maybe, they
"They
didn't
should have
no one
told
came
us,
in
oh, it
to help
closes at
us."
8."
And luckily, I had thought about before we left our house because we had, like, 15 minutes to pack and leave for this, and I had thrown a bunch of food into my backpack, and so luckily I was able to feed him snacks like that, and he
Mhm.
was able to get something to eat. But I started learning as I was there, like, there's a lot of things the hospital doesn't do, and it probably sounds like kind of ridiculous that I would think that they would tell us about the menu, but I didn't know how it worked. I had no idea at the time. So
One thing that I actually like to share is when we were driving to the hospital, I almost wasn't as stressed as I thought I would be, because like, I was just sitting there, and, like, it didn't feel real. It
mhm,
just felt like I
it
was gonna
definitely
wake up,
didn't.
and it was gonna be fine. So I was kinda just sitting there in the car, like, thinking like, "Oh, is this real?" I was just kinda sitting there because I wasn't really sure. I was like, "This doesn't
And I don't
seem
think you had
real."
any clue
No.
what was gonna we when they said tests, we thought, "Okay, there's gonna be some blood tests."
Yeah,
I was like I knew that, so we kinda prepared him for that, like, unfortunately, you hate shots,
yeah.
but
I was just sitting there, like,
mhm,
not sure, like, what if it was fake, if it was real, if it was just a bad dream, or, like, I don't know, it just didn't seem, like, real.
yeah, I get that, I felt like that too driving down
Mhm.
there, it's very surreal, and you don't you just kinda feel like you're watching somebody else go through it.
Yeah, like, I that's kinda what it felt like, actually.
Mhm.
You're just watching someone else
Yeah,
go
I
go
don't
through
know.
it, yeah.
Maybe therapists listening could tell us that's some sort
Yeah.
of detachment because of you couldn't handle the stress of it all. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it never happened before. I
No,
never ever would picture myself
no.
in there, so it just kinda felt like you were
And I
watching
was
someone
trying to call
else.
the Ronald McDonald House on the
Yeah.
way. I was trying to call family,
Oh, but they were closed
and
because of
they were
COVID.
closed because of
Can't
COVID.
really blame them.
Yeah, everything was so it was just a really stressful time. And they also would come in every hour or
Yeah,
so to do
so
vitals.
once you fall asleep and you're sleeping peacefully, they come in and they take your blood,
Yep.
and
And
it
they
even
take your
happens at the middle of the
temperature
night.
and they look over everything. But yeah, they would continually do blood tests and it would be like at midnight, it could be at one
Mhm.
o'clock in the morning. And there was other things they were coming doing about every hour. So you have that. And then you have the stress of he's hooked up to basically in 3 different places because he's got the lines for the heart, he's got the lines for the oxygen, and then he's got the IV lines.
Yeah.
And so, if any of you out there have been in a flare, you know that when you have to go to the
You
bathroom,
have to go
it's like right
right now.
then. It isn't like, "I have to use the restroom." "Oh, okay, here, let's unhook you." And
No.
so when Mason would say, "I have to go," I'm like, "Okay." So I'm trying to unhook everything, the monitors are going off, and luckily the nurses knew what would happen, that this was happening, and so I'm having to unhook him, get everything, and then try to
Plug the, IV tower.
yeah, drag it with
You
us.
can't pull the IV out.
No, I had to unplug that from the wall and then drag it with us and try to keep all the lines off the ground
Mhm.
because I didn't want anything
It
getting
had to be
yeah,
sanitary.
and so trying to chase him and then get him in there and, you know, it's tough because that is crucial timing and things don't always work out. And
Mhm.
so it was and he was doing this some like every 15 minutes, every half hour.
So, like, no joke, it was every 15 minutes.
Yeah, it was a lot. So, that is in itself, again, more stress on him. Gets stressed out whenever he has to use the bathroom because like, "Oh, great." And it was so all of these things, I mean, if I'm, like, looking at it and I'm going, "This was a lot of stress on a kid." And
And all at
part
once.
of it, we didn't have a diagnosis, part of it we did, obviously, because we found out 9 days in.
9 days in, they found out I
Yeah.
had Crohn's disease.
But you're slowly, realizing that the summer's passing. And
Yeah, my
it's
whole summer break.
it's like and we're still here, and we couldn't have visitors, and so
No.
Mason couldn't
There
see
were no
any
windows in the room either.
yeah,
They
yeah,
after a month or so, they moved us to a room with a window, but for the first month, the most stressful month,
mhm.
there was no window, you couldn't see anyone.
No, that was really,
Yeah.
like, odd,
There
actually.
was a little
There was a door, you
door,
could go into, like a
nice little yard to take walks
yeah,
sometimes,
but
but
it
there wasn't a
wasn't
window to
you
see the
couldn't see
outside.
outside, you couldn't
Yeah.
see anybody, and so even if anybody wanted to stop by and wave, they couldn't. And we did a lot of Zoom with people. They'd have him talk back and forth so he could see people, but it was extremely stressful in that sense too. You're in a windowless room for a month, and
Yeah.
suddenly he would see my parents at least 5 times a week sometimes,
Yeah.
and he'd see his cousins once a week, and so he went
And then
from
you just go from, like, 10
mhm.
to -5.
It's
The
yeah,
negatives,
really
you don't see
bad, huh?
yeah, except the nurses, you do see the nurses, but
Yeah, and they become like family
yeah.
because that's who you see the most, and
You're my family now.
yeah, and he was also diagnosed with a dilated aortic root, and that was the first diagnosis, actually, and that came out of the after they looked at his heart, they said, "Oh, he's got, like, an aneurysm. His heart could explode at any
Uh,
time." And
sucked.
that was like, "What? Where did this come from?" And all
That seemed
his
fine
checkups when he
before.
was born, everything from all the checkups after that, nothing had ever been told us there's ever a concern with his heart.
Yeah,
And so all of a sudden they're telling us this and they put him on beta blockers
and if
and
someone told you your heart could explode at any minute, is that not stressful? Is
yeah,
that not
right.
you think I can't
They
stress it?
told him
You
he
told me
he couldn't
that.
play sports, he couldn't run, he couldn't lift anything heavy, and it was
That's
like
stressful.
that was the first diagnosis. His life just changed
Mm,
immediately, and that was really stressful.
it
It
was.
took about 5 months, and they figured out that was an, inaccurate or incorrect
It was the incorrect
diagnosis.
diagnosis.
Yeah, and his heart
That's
was in fact
stressful or
fine.
nothing.
Yeah, we had a top cardiologist that specialized in this particular dilated aortic
He
root
walked into the
issue.
room, he listened to it, and he's like, "There's nothing.
Yeah,
It's fine."
yeah,
Like, it didn't take him a second, he knew it was fine.
and I'm going, "Why couldn't they have brought him in when you were hospitalized in the very
Yeah, because I
beginning?"
was
So
taking these beta blockers for no
and
reason.
you were
Don't you know what they were
stressed. It was
causing?
like it was stressful thinking, "I can't run around,
Yeah,
I can't play
I
any
can't
sports, I can't"
jump, I can't, like,
yeah,
run.
and they even told him, they said, "Oh, the other thing is funny, watch your stress because"
Watch your oh, by the way, your heart will explode, but watch your stress.
yeah,
You can't stress, okay?
"Watch your stress because the more stress you have, the more your heart's gonna beat," and so they were constantly monitoring his heart rate, so we had that diagnosis before the Crohn's, and so that when we got Crohn's on top of that, it was, like, a lot to take in.
Mhm,
One of the things I had mentioned, I kept trying to explain to the nurses, and you kept trying to explain this too,
mm,
you would be happier with both parents.
yeah,
And we later found out and sometimes, I mean, I don't know if everyone feels this way, but I feel like our IBD kids are not always treated as well as they should be. And you guys go through a lot.
Mhm,
And I feel like there's other kids at the hospital who definitely get a preference as far as what the hospital may consider stressful. So those kids are given more leniency. Those kids were allowed to have both parents with them. And I think personally, all kids should have their parents
mhm.
with them. I don't think there should be a decision made by anyone at a hospital that this child doesn't deserve to have their parents as much as this child does. I think any kid who is sick, anyone
Yeah,
who's going through something, or they
it's
deserve to
important to have
have both
parents.
parents. And I think that stress alone on Mason, I think it was very obvious. They let his dad in, and he did his dad and I be together with him for the first time after he'd been in there for a month.
When they moved us to a new
Yeah.
room.
The next day, after the first night where he got to be with both of us, was the first time Mason started doing better.
Mhm.
And
A lot 'cause it was like, I don't know how to explain it, but, like, all that stress was removed and well, not all of it, but you were
yeah,
together. You were a
there
family.
was a comfort to you on a level that you had some normal back, I
Mhm.
think. Like we had our family structure back.
Yeah.
And for you,
We
that
could hang out
really,
together, we could all build Legos together,
yeah.
could all watch shows together, you know?
And we had help because when it
Yeah.
was just one parent, I was the one constantly making his bed,
Yeah.
cleaning the floors, cleaning the nurses were too busy. They weren't able to
And then
help.
when he's up sometimes and they have to talk about the biologic they're thinking of
Mhm.
putting me on, and, she's not in here,
Yeah,
so now he has to call her and try
right,
to
and
remember
relay
everything they just
stuff,
said,
and it
and
was oh, that was so
yeah.
stressful. Yeah, I was like, "Oh my
Like,
gosh."
he's
So
putting him on what?
yeah,
Remicade? What's that?
yeah, and so this time we got to both be with the doctors and ask questions together.
Yeah.
And I think Mason finally, like, you got up in the morning and you
Mhm.
crawled over and you laid down with me.
Uh,
It was like, yeah, and you hadn't really gotten out of the
mhm.
bed too much. And that
Yeah.
was a big deal. And I think the nurses and the doctors did, one of them said to me, they recognized that this was really important to you, was to have
Mhm.
your family. And I think for any child in the hospital, you should not deny them both parents
No.
like that. And I think especially for Mason with the diagnosis you ended up receiving and being told you have an incurable disease and you deserve to have your dad and your mom with you together at that time. So we tried to do everything. We wanted the doctors to talk about everything in front of him.
Yeah.
We tried to be very upfront. We didn't want him feeling like anything was hidden from him. And so it was a very difficult time, and looking back now, and so I know this is, I mean, I hope this story isn't too boring for you guys, but this is what we went through kind of during the diagnosis. And I think being that it was COVID and being that you found you're having this disease and all of a sudden you're going to be at the hospital for the rest of your life
Mhm.
having it's like,
Getting these infusions, getting shots
yeah,
every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks.
it's a lot to expect of an adult to handle that news.
Mhm.
I would have had a hard time handling any
Yeah.
of that,
Anyone
let
would.
alone an 11-year-old. And so I think stress is key. And I think that just like it's difficult for IBD kids, I think it's difficult for any kids in there. So that's kind of why I think this was important to share, because I think a lot of you looking back, you might say, oh my gosh, this might be why my child suddenly seemed to flare and get a lot worse or have these, some of your kids might not. But I think for us, stress
Yeah.
definitely was
A big
part
part,
of
a big
it.
role, it played a big role.
Yeah, and I think they diagnosed Mason with generalized anxiety disorder, which
Wouldn't any kid have anxiety in that kinda setting with
yeah,
needles and
I'm like, if you're just
shots
basing
and
it off of this experience,
I feel like everyone would have anxiety.
I think they kinda came to that conclusion before the diagnosis because they thought that you were causing it.
Yeah.
Your anxiety
Which
was
isn't
causing it.
possible.
And I think a lot of you listening, like I said in the beginning, this is why I wanted to come back to this. A lot of you listening probably heard this from your own doctors, you adults out there. A lot of times with adults, it's like, "Oh, it's your anxiety." And it's not to say you don't have a separate anxiety issue. That's entirely possible. But it's just important not to blame
Mm. You
yourself.
can't cause Crohn's disease. It's just
Yeah.
something that is a genetic issue or
Mhm.
something along those lines. No one really knows, but you can't cause it.
Yeah.
No, you can't cause it.
And I
You
encourage
wouldn't wanna cause it, at
no, it
least
doesn't make any sense,
yeah.
but I would encourage you to, if you have a doctor who is blaming you for any symptoms. Maybe you don't have IBD and you're listening to us because you are having other symptoms and maybe you feel like your doctor's not listening to you, or maybe your doctor is saying it's anxiety, it's stress. It's important for them to look further and not blame you as the root of the
Mhm.
cause of this problem. It could be more.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not Crohn's disease,
You're not taking it
but
seriously enough.
yeah.
Yeah.
But if it is Crohn's disease, you need to treat that and not treat just the anxiety and act like it's something that you're doing.
Yeah.
So, like we said, this whole thing was not about saying that you cause like stress causes Crohn's disease. It just is a trigger potentially.
Mhm.
And maybe for some of you listening, it's not. And maybe it's, for I know several other people though who it is. And so I thought it was worth talking about and sharing our story and just showing maybe you can look back now and look at all the things that added up. Like if you add all these things like we just talked about, I was going, oh my gosh, you're under a
Yeah.
lot of pressure. Like,
Wonder why that flare occurred.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's like, wow, that can make a lot of sense. And as we always do, we try to be there for you guys and let you know you're not alone and maybe give you a story you can relate to or learn from, or even share your own experiences with us.
Yeah.
And we're always encourage you guys to visit a doctor if you have any strange symptoms that, even if you're having stress, you're having these symptoms, talk to your doctors. And if you feel your doctor isn't taking you seriously, get a second opinion.
Mhm.
So just take that seriously.
'Cause
So
your health always comes first.
it does. All right.
It's a
Well,
good way to end it.
it is a good way to end it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're going to have a podcast out next week because it will be Christmas.
Yeah.
So we may end up skipping a week. I'm not sure what we'll do. So we'll either see you next week or in
Or
2 weeks.
next week after the
Yeah.
next week.
Yeah. So we'll see how our timing works out and see if we can get another episode in there. Otherwise, we'll be back after Christmas with our next episode.
Have a wonderful Christmas. Have fun opening gifts. Have fun just hanging out with the family. Hey, have fun in the Christmas spirit. Have fun watching Christmas movies.
Yeah.
Have fun listening
That's
to
what we've been
Christmas
doing.
music.
Enjoy it all,
Yeah,
right?
enjoy it
Just
all while you
embrace
still
the
can.
season right
Embrace
now.
Christmas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or the
Embrace the
holidays,
joy.
however you celebrate,
Yeah.
whatever it means to you.
Celebrate whatever you
Yeah,
celebrate.
yeah, and enjoy
My
it.
wording is wonderful.
It's okay.
It is. No one's perfect. No one's
So we
perfect.
thank you guys for listening
Yeah.
as always. And feel free to listen to us on any podcast stations like iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. You can find us on there. I'll put a link to Buzzsprout, which will give you all the different icons you can click on to find a podcast station. You can also follow us on Instagram at Team IB Determined and see lots of our pictures and see more of our story. So you can follow us on there.
And if you like watching, you can go to YouTube. And if you already are on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to be notified every time we post a video, make sure to hit that bell. And also, we don't get many comments, but we have been getting comments. And there was someone who actually left a really nice comment
Yeah,
last video, I
there
think.
was a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there is. And shout out to Michael. He is an 11-year-old with Crohn's disease
yeah,
who
shout out to
was
you.
listening. Yeah, and he had one of his parents say hi to us
Yeah.
on the comments. So that
Shout
was,
out to you.
yeah, kind of cool for you, right? You're
Yeah,
like,
it's
oh,
cool.
another kid
See
who's
from
got,
see response
yeah,
from other people. Yeah.
yeah. So we appreciate it. And it helps us know what we should talk about
Yeah.
because we
If you
really
have
want this to be
ideas,
interesting. We don't want us always like
yeah,
babble. Like maybe today our story was like, you're like,
a
I
little
didn't
boring
really
for you.
care about that.
Maybe if you have an idea for a future video or something like that, you can leave it in the
Yeah,
comments
something
or
important to
yeah.
you because we want to discuss it and make sure that you feel heard. And chances are, if you have that thought or question, somebody else does too.
Right.
And so let us know. Keep us posted.
Say hi or drop in or say whatever, whatever you want, as
Whatever you want
long
to
as it's
say. A
nice.
hello is great. Where you're listening from.
What you're related to, if there was
Yep.
anything you're related to in this video, what you liked about today's video, yeah, anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feel like
We
we'd
should do
like to
shout
hear it.
outs more often.
I know. I know.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys. Well, have a good morning, afternoon, evening,
Christmas
Christmas.
Eve,
Yeah.
Christmas
Week.
month, week, yeah,
We're like down to like
time,
the last week,
music,
just about.
movie, yeah.
Yeah. Enjoy it all.
Yeah, enjoy it all.
And we will see you guys on the next episode.
Episode. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you will stick around, tune in, and reach out to us with your own journeys. We are excited to give you an inside view of what it takes to be a caregiver and what it's like to be a patient.
And most of all, we hope you'll maybe be able to apply something you hear on here that might help you in your own life. Sometimes life changes, and it's all about how you handle the journey.